Okay, we're going.
Okay, great. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Hand Tools SIG again. Good to see you all. And I want to first of all just show you something. A friend of ours up in Santa Rosa is a milliner, and she had to cancel all her shows this summer because the shows were canceled. So she turned her hand to making masks, and she sent me this one, which I think is very appropriate for the situation. I don't know if you can.
I can see the wood. Yeah.
Close up, but anyway, so she's having fun making masks for individual people that she sort of custom makes them for. Anyway, to get serious, this morning we've got a really something a little different. What we're going to do is John Mullen, who is he's relatively new to the shop, I think, in the last year or two, but he has an interest in bow making, and I first met him when he came into the shop and was working on the bows, and we talked and I learned a lot and was able to help him with a few of the use of the tools and stuff. But anyway, he's continued to make bows. I presume that he's got a background in archery, but the bow is a very ancient hunting instrument, and then became a weapon of war, and was a pretty fearsome and dangerous weapon of war as well, because it was essentially, by the standards of the times, a long-range weapon of mass destruction if you had a well-trained group of archers. And that tradition has carried through. The bow's goes back a long, long way. It's been used almost everywhere in the world for hunting initially. John specifically tends to make the styles of bows that American Indians used to use, or Native Americans used to use. So his bows are a little shorter than the English longbow, but that about it gets me to the extent of my knowledge about bows and arrows, except I played with them as a kid. So I'm going to pass you over to John, I'm going to just very briefly go through our itinerary for the day. So Dallas is going to turn it to my delightful writing there. Incidentally, at the top is my exclusive woodwork email address. So if you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me at that email. The intro we're doing now, we're going to do bow making, and then I'm going to demonstrate a tool that I found in the back of a closet here in the shop. It's for making dowels, and I'll give you the whole spiel on that in a little while. If we have time, I'm going to bring up a mystery tool on the spoke shave theme, and then I would really like you guys, I should have given you some warning, and we may not have a lot of time, but if you have a pet project that you would like to do, and perhaps between us we can share the necessary knowledge to help get you going on that. I'd love to hear from you either today or next week or any time. I think it should be an ongoing thing. Anyway, if there's time and if we need to, I'll show you a pet project that I did. So, okay, let's pass it over to John. You ready, John?
Sure am.
All right, there you go, you're on.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks again. But my name is specifically to give you a little bit of background why I did this.
Well, you're kind of cutting out for some reason. We're not getting good sound.
That is a shame. Hang on. I was afraid of this. It's a problem with my Bluetooth. Any better, or is it still cutting in and out?
I think that's better.
Okay, I'll try to maintain close and direct eye contact. So first, a little bit of background as to why I got into bows. I, as Paul correctly guessed, had a childhood or late adolescent background in archery from a mentor of mine that was really impactful in my life in high school. And he passed on to me a love of traditional archery, so none of that fiberglass lamination stuff, but like sticks. And then that stuck long enough for me to get interested later on in college and eventually in my career, which is my current phase of life. The love stuck, and eventually I had time and resources to start making bows myself.
Yeah, because John, you're still cutting in and out on us.
Tell you what, let me get some headphones that won't do that. I apologize for the inconvenience.
He came up with a solution the other night when we had a similar problem.
Okay.
If it's any consolation, the video is pretty good.
Yeah, we're halfway there. How's that?
Much
Very nice.
better.
That is really frustrating. I vetted this with Paul earlier this week, but apparently my technology was not up to the challenge, so please excuse me and my apologies. To recap what I had begun to blather about, I got into archery in high school through a mentor. It stuck with me ever since, and in recent years I've begun making bows. So the kind of bow that I've spent the most time working on is indeed a Native American style derivation. Probably not exact orthodoxy, if you would ask an historic Native American, but is really the result of a lot of work by people who contributed to this book. So this is the Boyer's Bible, 1 of 4, and this is probably the most influential series of books that I've ever found on archery. And in this is a wealth of knowledge from people who have really tackled it in a systematic and historically appreciative way and converged on a number of bow styles that they have well fleshed out in their own lives. So it's kind of a hybrid, not exactly a one-to-one correlation with an historic Native American form, but it holds true in a number of respects. One is the size. It's not as long as an English longbow. It's flat cross section. You can see it's rectangular cross section as opposed to a rounded longbow shape, which is very English. It has a thinner handle, and this is what's known as a stiff or a non-working handle, which I have wrapped with carbon fiber here for strength because I had to glue on a piece of wood to the back. As you can see, my original stave was not thick enough. So except for the carbon fiber, this is a bow shape and style and even approximate length being about, so this would be a shorter bow for a Native American in like the eastern forests of America. This is about, I don't know, just over 4 feet, between 4 and 5 feet long. So this would be a short bow, but the bow lengths varied all across the continental US from what we would think of as like nearly man height bows, so full length or full height, all the way down to almost a kind of a composite bow shape that you might see in like the steppes of Asia that was mirrored somewhat in the pony bows that the Plains Indians used, like the Sioux or the Comanche. So the wood that I'm holding here is Osage, which is distinctly orangey yellow and darkens with age to an almost purplish black if the bow books are to be believed. So this piece of wood I cut down with the help of a forester about 6 years ago in Ohio when I was there for grad school. And the native range of Osage extends throughout much of the continental US, which is why it was such a common wood. And it really has unparalleled strength characteristics for bow making. It's not only dense and strong, but it has excellent both elasticity and compressibility. So it can take both high tension loads on the back and high compressive loads on the belly. Now the back is the part of the bow that faces away from you as you shoot. The belly is the side that faces towards you. So that's all well and good, but how do you actually make one? The first thing you need to do is find a tree. But if you don't have time for that, you can buy a stave online. And a stave is just an unfinished blank from which you can make a finished bow. You want your stave to be as straight as possible. You're going to start it either with the bark still on or with both the bark and the early wood or the spring wood removed. Sapwood, I'm sorry, misspoke. So the interesting thing about Osage is that for this species, you have almost no use for the spongy, kind of crumbly sapwood as opposed to the heartwood. All Osage bows are going to be entirely heartwood. So once you have your stave and it's either been pre-skinned, pre-debarked, or you do that yourself, what you'll want to do is look at the bow or the stave shape and then lay out the shape of your bow along it. That's sort of like, it's probably apocryphal, but the quote, was it from Michelangelo? He said that he made a sculpture by looking at a piece of stone and then taking away anything that didn't look like a statue. It's the same basic thing for a bow. You want to look at the piece of wood, and the straighter and less wavy it is, the easier it's going to be to make a bow out of it. But as bowyers or bow makers progress in skill level, they often enjoy choosing harder and harder pieces of wood to make bows out of, just for the sheer joy of it. So this piece of wood, I'll back up so you can see it, has huge dog legs in it, is a weird shape through the handle, and then has asymmetrical swoops to it, back sets. I didn't put these in, this is how it dried. It was straight more or less when I split it out from the log that I cut down, but this is the shape it took. So the basic premise is that you want something with a smooth, gradual taper from maximum limb thickness all the way down to the nocks. That makes sense. And that's more or less symmetric on both sides. You want something that tapers after the handle smoothly down to the minimum or the normal working thickness. And then you want the transition regions to be graceful and gradual. So you have a nice steady taper here from handle thickness out, it flares out, kind of hip there. And then the same way, that same region is a transitional region for the bow thickness this way. And that all is pretty intuitive. Once you have the shape of the bow laid out, and for most bows of this style, it's going to be about 2 inches thick, maybe a little thinner, or wide rather, at its widest point, tapering down to, I don't know, 1/2 inch wide or so, 3/4 at the nocks. About a 1/2 inch thick all through the working length, maybe 1.5 inches thick at the handle, and the handle has a width of about 7/8 to 1 inch. So that's roughly the dimensions you're working with. Bow length from end to end can be anywhere from 50, 55 inches all the way up to 66, 67. Just depends on how short or long you want the bow to be. In general, longer bows are going to have a smoother drawback, whereas shorter bows are going to suffer from what's called stack, which means that the further you pull it, the harder it's going to be to keep pulling it. And that's because the string angle changes throughout your draw length. When you first string a bow, the string is almost perpendicular to you. Sorry, parallel to you if you're standing upright. But as you continue to pull it, that string angle changes more and more until you essentially lose all of your mechanical advantage from the string, and you're trying to pull, you're trying to lengthen a straight piece of wood essentially at the tip, so that's not great. Now the tools that I use to actually create the shape of the bow from the piece of stave are pretty simple. I'll lay them out now. To do the rough shaping work, I default to this. This is a hewing hatchet, which is a one-sided beveled hatchet, allowing you to get a flush face. I also use a normal camping hatchet, and just depends on the stroke style that I'm doing. So I find that this one is useful for doing the angled choppy strokes, like when you have transitional regions around the handle. This one is better for establishing long, smooth regions of the bow, like the limbs that don't need quick transitions. Once you have the really rough shape laid out, you'll transition to this tool, which is my personal favorite. This is a draw knife. And this is a favorite of traditional bow makers everywhere, and is usually used in conjunction with the thing I'm sitting on, which is a shave horse. I'll change the angle of my camera so you can see it. So this shave horse I built myself, and is probably the most important tool if you're going to be bow making for any length of time. And the way it works is you sit on it, lay the bow out here, use this foot pedal to clamp it down, and then you just do your thing. So what I'm doing now is doing a little smoothing work on the back of the bow. But really what I used most of this this, what I use this tool the most for is really setting the smooth, gradual sides of the taper bow width from handle to nock. So I also have a shorter draw knife here. This is nice because it actually bends a little bit. This one is a flexible draw knife, which has springy steel that's made to flex around and bend around to get more precise cutting angles, which is fun. Another thing that I've rediscovered is a spoke shave. I use this primarily when I want to take wood off of the belly. So once you've set your handle width and your limb shape, what you want to do is choose a single growth ring. And a growth ring, of course, is just an annular ring that the tree lays down. You can see a few here visible on the end of the cross section of the bow. Each side is going to have one. And the reason that this looks so smooth is because this is a single growth ring. You want to maintain a single growth ring along the entire length of your bow. You can see I kind of goofed it up here. That little line there visible is the difference between two growth rings. You don't want that, but since it's so close to the tip of the bow, which doesn't really bend much, it shouldn't be an issue. Again, the reason you want a single growth ring is fairly intuitive because you don't want fibers to be cut. You want continuous fibers running all along the length of your bow end to end because they're going to be placed under tremendous stress, and any joints between the two layers of annular growth rings is going to be a plane of separation, which is going to cause your bow to break. With some species, this matters more than others. Osage has a particularly poor early wood layer, and the early wood is the light wood that the tree lays down in between those thicker and darker rings of late wood, and the tree typically lays one down of each year. So the early wood is the low quality wood that the tree will make right after it comes out of hibernation in the winter. So that's early spring. Not great. It's mostly meant to just like restart the tree's system. Well, the late wood is where all the strength is. And this varies from species to species, but I'm giving you Osage specific content. So I typically will find myself using the draw knife more to set the back of the bow, and the spoke shave more to set the belly of the bow, because you see that the belly doesn't respect growth rings. It doesn't matter. You want the back to be nice and smooth and really follow the shape of the tree, but the belly, you're just looking for a constant thickness. And often growth rings are not the same thickness in different parts of the tree. So you want something that can cut with a predetermined depth, which is where the spoke shave dominates. The draw knife will tend to grab and gouge, but the spoke shave makes nice uniform curls like this. How am I doing on time, Paul? Do you want me to speed it up at all?
There it is. It's a missing check.
You're doing excellent on time, and just take your time. This is absolutely fascinating.
Sounds good. Just don't want to bore anybody. There we go. So let's look and see what I could demo on this. I've mostly got this roughed out, but here we go. So if you look at this, see that flaw there around that pin? Pins and knots in Osage are very, very common and very difficult to work around correctly. You can see here there's a major knot formed by the decaying area of a dead small branch, and it's coming through the back. Now that's fine as long as you leave a thickened area, kind of a hump around there, which the tree usually does anyway. So if you follow the growth ring, you'll be okay most of the time. On the back side, using the spoke shave, or on the belly side rather, using the spoke shave here, pulled out some wood as I went over it. So it made a rough spot. And this works out well because I have to finish my 3 favorite things to finish small flaws. Card scrapers. These things are useful. Flat one, good for working on the back of the bow where you want a nice flat shape. Curved, nice for the belly of the bow or the sides where you have a detailed curvature you want to deal with. And then this like French curved style one here, useful if you have a really narrow valley or something in the wood that you want to work out. So what I'm going to do is go to this one, which is my favorite. I'm going to look for that rough spot. Get a nice grip. And then just start to work in detail. Okay, it looks like I need to get in a little bit more right around that knot. There's a ridge of wood that I'm having trouble taking out. What I might do, if I can't really get the curvature set correctly, if I still have like an undulation that I want to even out, I'll grab this bad boy. This is a rasp, Corradi, C-O-R-R-A-D-I, Italian made, to which I'm quite partial, because this guy has randomly cut teeth. It doesn't have rows, which a normal like Sears brand or Craftsman rasp would, which cause gouging and grabbing. You don't want that. So I like this one for detailed work. I use this one quite a bit when I'm working on curvature around the handle, especially where there's quickly changing profile. This is a half round rasp, I think 6 inches long. It works well for the task. Here, I'll show you. You may be able to see this. Let's see if my camera can pick it up. See those little teeth marks? Not a problem. Those are pretty shallow, which means that I can either finish them out by cross-hatching the pattern, or I can just go back to the card scraper, which I will do. Grab the rounded one. Beautiful. Check that out. Look at that. I hope you can see. There's something about Osage which I love, which is that it almost glows. It has a kind of a luminous thing going on there. And look at that little bird's eye. So I would use a similar technique for roughing out tool marks anywhere. These are rasp marks that I made where I had that transition between the carbon fiber and the wood. I'll use the same tool, same approach to smooth that out. Once you have the basic shape of the bow set, what you'll do is transition to something called a tillering stick, which is that tool behind me. So how this works, I'll actually cheat a bit and show you a different bow that I pre-made. So how that works is you're looking for parts of the bow that are bending more than other parts. Can anyone tell me what's wrong with the bow in the tillering stick right now?
It may be an optical illusion, but looking at it on the right-hand side, where we see the horizontal of your fence cross the bow, it looks as though there's a step in the angle, a small
Yep.
step in the angle.
Yep.
Is that an optical illusion or is that true?
Nope, that's true.
Okay.
It's a little of both. Because this thing wasn't quite squared up with the fence. But that's absolutely correct. So you see how this limb is actually bending a little bit more, even though it looks from where you are like it's bending a little bit less because of the trick of how the fence is running. This side is a little bit stiffer than the other one. So the tillering process is really just put the bow in the tillering stick, partially pull it, look at the curvature, identify regions where it's bending too stiffly or not enough, bending not enough, and then target those areas to take material off. That's pretty much it. Where the bow is not bending enough, take material off. Where it's bending too much, work the rest of the bow down to that thickness. Now the hardest part is always hitting a particular draw weight. Draw weight is just the poundage of how much it takes to pull the bow to full draw. Getting that right to any precision is probably the hardest part of tillering. That bow there is about 55 pounds, maybe a little bit less now at my draw weight, or my draw length, which is 28 inches, give or take. Now this bow, which I will show you now, looks pretty much like what this guy might look like when it's done, minus the carbon fiber handle. This is an Osage bow with a nice dog leg or a snake here in the limb. I love that. As you can see, it's straightish from start to finish, but not quite. It has a kind of a lazy parenthetical shape from limb to limb, and it has this wonderful little swoop in the middle of it. And it has a big crack right there in the belly. I thought that was going to ruin it, so I didn't use this. I set this stave in my garage for years and years and never touched it for fear that it would fail. But then one Saturday I said, screw it, I'm stuck bored at home, I'm just going to give it a shot. And it turns out, because I was able to position the crack mostly in the non-working or the handle part of the bow, doesn't matter. It might break in a few years, this might be how it breaks, but for now, not a problem at all. This one is, I think, the 6th or 7th bow I've made start to finish, and definitely came out the best. So you can see that I correctly kept it to one growth ring on the back. I followed the grain of the wood, following all the swoops in it. If I tried to make this a straight bow, then it would have broken because I would have disrespected the flow of the grain. Same problem that you have if you cut through too many growth rings. It's a similar thing if you don't respect the grain. You're still breaking fibers, you're still creating weak points. That's still how it's going to break. And then this little arrow plate here is just a leather wrap. So the plan is to shoot off your hand, which is totally comfortable unless an arrow feather comes off and sticks in your hand, which has happened but is rare. And this guy pulls about 43 pounds at my draw length. So this is a real nice intro weight for an average adult male, about 5'10". So the thing that bow making has given me is an appreciation of the material, a love of the, there's a sort of, pardon me if I wax poetic, but there's a sort of deep magic to working with wood and forcing it to make something that feels alive in your hands. There's a joy and a beauty in making static objects from wood, furniture, functional things, beautiful things. But there's a sort of organic mysticism that naturally accompanies traditional bow making as a process. It's why I love it. It's why I don't love compound bows. It's why I don't love bows made out of metal. I'm an engineer in my day job, so I get enough of that in things that I have to do for work. But bow making has been special to me. Learning about it has made me feel, I'm looking for that book. Reading this and similar books has made me feel connected to the past, connected to long dead artisans of a craft that was almost lost, but then recovered. And the beautiful thing is that there's now thriving small communities of bow makers online, and there's traditional bow making meetups in certain parts of the country. And the craft looks like it's going to survive, which is something that was in doubt, say in the 70s and 80s, but has since, it's found a second wind and a renaissance in my generation. And I'm grateful to be able to participate in some small way in that. So my hope is that with the entry of this topic into the hand tool SIG, that there will be enough people interested that at some point in the future, I could maybe put together a seminar on how to do this yourself. So get some hand tools, get the right materials, and then follow along with me as we maybe do a multi-part series on bow making. And that's still totally hypothetical, but we'll kind of gauge interest as we go. And thanks for letting me talk. Any questions?
We're open for questions. Anybody has it?
John, just on the notion of getting a critical mass to do a series or maybe get a build going, it seems to me like this Zoom session, if populated into the right groups, meetup groups in San Diego. I mean, for instance, at Balboa Park, there are 2 ranges, and I'm sure there are get-togethers or there are meetup groups around that. With enough people seeing this video, which frankly, I mean, your love of this comes through, and I'm thinking thoughts that I hadn't ever thought before, and that's a really good thing. Those who might react similarly might jump on board. And so to get to that critical mass, if we put it out there to those groups, once it's online, especially with the solicitation you've got here at the end, maybe you could get more attention and grow to the right scale you need to justify putting the time and effort into it.
Yeah.
And I think you were saying it's true that historical Native American material used in bow making includes carbon fiber. Is that correct?
Yeah, the little known tribes.
Can you elaborate on the carbon fiber, how it's adhered to and with that secondary support piece?
Yeah, so this, if I had just relied on wood glue, which is what I initially used to glue these 2 pieces together, then I would have run the risk, I mean, it might not have happened, but I would have run the risk of popping this thing right off the back of the bow. There's also some big knots here that I'm partially covering up on each end with carbon fiber. How I do that is just mix together a 2-part epoxy. I like West Systems epoxy, but brand specificity doesn't matter. You just need a hard setting 2-part epoxy, and then you get strips of carbon fiber bidirectional weave. And this was actually gifted to me by a friend as surplus from his work in the defense industry. They use a lot of carbon fiber there. So I used a big roll, or what was left of a big roll of carbon fiber, and then just did a continuous wrap around the handle both directions, completely saturating it with the 2-part epoxy after I'd mixed it, which is just a resin and a hardener. I then wrapped the entire length of that reinforced handle section with a heat shrinkable tape, which is used to squeeze out excess resin, because you don't want more resin weight in your finished bow than you have to have. And then I heat gunned that just to get it shrunk up and nicely fitting, give it a nice finish, and then let it cure overnight, unwrap the plastic, and then I had a very different appearance from what this is now. This is kind of dull black. What it comes out as with a finished epoxy look is a shiny black, because the epoxy gives it a nice finish. But I used this guy to make it look like one continuous surface, because the individual wraps of carbon fiber produce little ridges and bumps, even with a nice finish applied by the shrink wrap tape. Such a weird bendy surface like this is hard to get perfect adherence to in all spots. So I used this to shape it down, which is why you can see the cutaway on the side. I took away all the carbon fiber there on that surface. And that's just because I had to thin the handle up a little bit. Yeah. Ideally, you would not have to do this. So this is not the way I would want it to be, but this is a salvage a piece of wood technique that I might not otherwise be able to use.
And then I guess one other thing is, how do you test it just short of failure on a bow?
Yeah, that's a good question. You should, with a wooden bow, you should never feel like you're almost about to break it. And I don't mean that you shouldn't be scared the first time you pull it, because the first time you tiller a wooden bow like the one behind me, you're going to feel like the wood's going to splinter at any moment. But if you follow the correct dimensional guidelines to get it roughly correct, and if you have a good piece of wood with minimal flaws in it, then you won't hear those nightmare-inducing cracks or ticks as you pull the bow. So if you start to hear a little series of tick, 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 then that's often leading up to a snap. If you might hear one or two as the wood kind of settles out, but basically at every stage of the tillering process, you'll want to do multiple partial pulls of the bow. So you work it into its final shape and kind of massage it into that final configuration. Now that guy behind me is a bit of a monstrosity, because that is a tri-laminate layer bow of bamboo on the back, Osage orange in the middle, and hickory on the belly. So 3 layers. One side also currently has, I'll show you this because it's really cool. One side also has this weird bumpy glued surface to it. I know this isn't fair, but I'll take any guesses. What do you think this is? This thing that I've glued on top of the bow. Any guesses?
A bark?
That is good, and I'll give half points for that. This is flax. This is combed, carded flax. And the brown stuff that holds it to the bow is hide glue, which is made from essentially rendered animal hides, and is chosen. This is actually a traditional technique, not the flax. It would have been sinew, like from a deer, but flax is a good substitute and way cheaper. The hide glue was absolutely used by Native Americans and is still used by people who want to apply sinew or rawhide to the back of bows. That's something I didn't have time to talk about directly, but this is a little curl of rawhide. This is goat rawhide. And what you do is stick this in hot water to soften it, let it soak there for about 15 minutes. Spread it out, stretch it out over the back of the bow. That's a technique often used if you have concerns about the integrity of your bow, if you think it's going to break. If you see a flaw in the wood, maybe, and you want to save it, stretch it out, and then just use wood glue. I use Tight Bond 3 because it's water resistant. And then you can wrap it up with something, whether string or an ace bandage or a t-shirt you've torn it into strips, whatever. Let it dry, and then kind of sand it down.
Where do you practice your archery?
I practice a little bit right in my backyard. So I have a target here set up, and I shoot from one end of my yard to the other. In fact, let me see if I can show you.
This just got really exciting.
Just got.
I noticed a no caps
On arrows, which are, yeah, arrows are another part of the game I didn't even mention. Wood shaft, I think this is a 1/4 inch shaft, maybe a 5/16. Wood shaft, slightly thicker, 11/32. Note the different shapes of arrows on the back. This one, just as, because I can't resist telling you, this is a shield cut, which is why it has that little sharp end. This is a parabolic for reasons which are hopefully self-explanatory. They have slightly different properties. Archers argue about them back and forth all the time. Archers love to argue about arcane stuff. Now, what what I'm using here, this is a tab. This is a little piece of leather that you stick on your hand like this. I have been taught a split finger grip style, which is why there's a little cut here in the middle. So one finger above, two fingers below the nock of the arrow. This bow has an arrow rest cut into it and built up. So instead of shooting off the hand, I will be shooting off this little rest here. This is a strike plate for the arrow. This is the handle, of course, made out of deer hide. And I haven't done this in a while, but let's see if I can. Sounds pretty good, right?
Yeah.
Now what I'm going to try to do now is match that arrow's position. So I'm going to look for that arrow where it landed in the target and try to match it. Let's see if I can do it.
Yes, split it.
So I didn't split it, but I was a couple inches away.
Pretty good.
Wow.
All right.
Here we go.
Oh, wow.
I'm surprised
That's impressive.
on camera. But from 15 feet away, even I can be accurate.
That was pretty good.
John, thank you.
Thanks for listening and watching.
Yeah, this is excellent. Thank you very much.
Of course, it was a pleasure. Back to you, Paul.
All right, thank you, John. That was absolutely fascinating.
Thanks, man.
I was riveted. That's just so interesting that you use so many tools that we've looked at in the recent past. So I'm going to move on to a slightly different tool, not a common tool, and not something that a lot of people think about. But you know how when you want some dowel, you usually have to go by a 3-foot length, and even if you go to somewhere like TH&H, they might have a range of, they'll have walnut and maple and some poplar and stuff like that, but they sure aren't going to have sapelli or even Bubinga. And when you think about it, you don't really need 3 feet of dowel for most of your dowel uses. So there's a company out there by the name of Woodpecker. They make these high-end, newly designed tools, and they have this program where they design a tool and they give it publicity and take orders and then make to order. And this was one of those tools that was, we're not quite sure how it got into the shop at this point, but it is one of those tools that I found in the back of a closet here. And what it does is it literally makes dowels, and they charged about $450 for it. They have this one-time process. They don't make them again unless they're super, super popular. So you can't buy this on the open market, but it's a really useful item for us to have in the shop. You can make basically customized dowels for 1/2 inch, 3/8, and 1/4 inch width, and you can also groove them. You can make 3/4 inch dowels, but it doesn't have a die to do that. So what I'm going to do is demonstrate how it works, because it's easy enough to mess it up as I can show you here. But basically, what you do, say you're working and you're making something out of mahogany, and you want to make a nice 1/2 inch dowel that you can, however many you need, you can make multiples of them, but you just want it to be exactly the same wood, even though you're going to get a contrast, or you may want it to be a completely different wood. You may be making something in maple and want to put some rosewood in there. I think this is a little piece of rosewood, but rosewood makes very pretty little 1/4 inch dowels. So the way to do this is you start off by cutting something that is a 1/16th of an inch bigger than your final dowel. And this tool has a long, long screw that I can hear your brains working. I've already thought it through. I think if you take this circlip off, there's a hex thing in there, and one could use a cordless drill to do this, because we're going to be doing quite a bit of it. Okay, so what this guy is it's basically set up so that it will drive a 6-inch piece of wood through one of these dies, which we set in the end here. And when we start with something that is a 1/16 of an inch bigger than a 1/2 inch, that's actually quite a lot of wood to remove. And if you do it carelessly, or you try to remove too much wood at one time, this is what happens. This is a piece of sycamore, which is not the world's strongest wood. What we do is we take and we start by using a die that is somewhat larger than our final size. So in the case of this, the way it works is, traditionally, if you wanted to make dowels and you didn't have a lathe, or you wanted to make a 1/4 inch dowel and you had a lathe that was so big you couldn't do it, what you would do is take a plate of steel that had a little wider side on the back side, and you make a really nice sharp edge there at 90 degrees, and you hammer your dowels through. Hammering long pieces, short, thin pieces of wood can be a little annoying. You know, the times I've tried to do things like that, I've ended up with a lot of broken wood. What we're going to do is basically make a square peg go into a round hole. That's been something I've been trying to be all my life. People have never actually forced me into the round hole yet, but we can do that here. So I'm going to take, we're looking for, these are measured in thousandths, and we're going to take the largest of these, which is etched on here. Unfortunately, when you sharpen these, you take off the etching. So you need to remember which size they are. So that is 0.5, exactly 1/2 of an inch. This one is 0.51, and this one is 0.55. So 550,000th of an inch. So the first thing you do is put the piece that you want in with the cutting face. Told you I had the dropsies last week. You fit that in here, and there's this really neat little spring-loaded thing which guides our piece of wood in. Okay, we take
Hey, Dallas, is there a chance we could get a little closer?
I will try.
All right, I will put these on hold until we, or I can bring the bench a little closer.
Oh, yeah.
Good now?
Great, thank you.
Do you want to put that on a table?
It's okay right now.
Okay, right. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to set this in here. You can see that there's a V shape here. So we're going to put this piece, first I've got to wind it out a little bit. I'm going to put this piece in. The V shape helps to guide you through the hole. When you're setting this up, you've got to be careful that you're not going to be leaving a flat edge on one side. Well, at the 0.55, it's not going to matter. But when you get to your final, you don't want a flat edge on one side. Okay, so now I've set this up. This here is a cone, an internal cone shape, as it were, and that will hold any size there in the center. It guides everything into the center. So now this is the fun part. We start winding.
Where's the motor, Paul?
It's called an Armstrong motor.
I see, okay.
But I can hear that cordless drill and something like a 9/16
Nice.
socket wrench doing it for me.
How many
So
dies
as
do we
you
have
can
for
see-
this?
Sorry?
How many different sizes do we have for the die insert?
3/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 3/8, and 1/4.
And each of those has two sizes slightly larger?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
Maybe not the 1/4.
Okay.
Now you can see there's a plastic, I should have leveled this bench before there's a plastic sleeve there that's going to stop me going any further. So I'm unable to push the whole thing through. Now this is what I've worked out is, especially when you're backing it out to do a new one. I know I had some pads. Oh, here we go. I'm sorry. I'm going to put some pads under this bench. There we go. All right. You have to get your positioning just right to be able to do this. Otherwise, you're going to stand here and wind it out. Okay, I wound out way too far. But there are these little pins. Actually, it'll help to be this far out. They fit right in there, and they will push my piece all the way. And I went way too far in my exuberance of demonstrating my technique.
So we still have maybe 3/8 of an inch to go or something?
Yeah, something like that. Not very far. Sounds like it just split the end off, but that's all right. We can make more. Okay, so now I have to wind it all the way out.
What is that, Scully you're doing?
This is just a piece of mahogany. See, here's a different pin for the 1/4 inch, and there was one that was slightly smaller. The 1/2 inch one will do the 1/2 inch or the 3/4, or the 3/8. Okay, now you have to clear the stuff that's in here. And this is spring loaded, so eventually you get it to move.
Hey, Paul, what was the name of the company again?
Sorry?
What was the name of the company again that made these custom batch tools?
Woodpecker.
Woodpecker. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you almost all their tools are this red anodized aluminum bodies, and they have. I think marking out tools is one of their real fortes. They come up with these new designs for woodworkers that you don't actually need, but if you've got a few bucks, there's some pretty neat tools.
You can't resist, huh?
Yeah, it's like Bridge City. They're aiming at a specific market, but this really is like a niche market. Now, you may look at this and think, well, it's really rough. It's going to come out rough at the end. But when you think about it, a dowel, you don't see this part of the dowel. And if you really need to, you can sand and adjust your size. The other thing is, of course, there's no, unlike when you're planing or spoke shaving, there's no with the grain and without and against the grain, because you get everything. In a round piece of wood, you get it all. So one side is always a couple of edges are going to be rougher. You see how much easier that is now that I've taken off the rough stuff? Oh, that's because I didn't change the dye.
That would explain it.
Oh, Lord, I'm going to have to go all the way through now. You guys get the gist. Maybe I won't, because we're running a little low on time. How are we doing on that? We got another 15?
I think we do.
Huh?
I think we do.
Good. Okay, then we'll demo one down to the size. I'm not going to do more than one. But I really like this. Say you wanted something like holly. I don't think you're going to be able to go out and buy holly as a dowel. You're going to have to make it one way or another.
Useful.
You could do it by cutting it down and then using a card scraper. But even me as a hand tool worker, I'd rather do something like this. Okay, so now I'm going to take the 550 thousandths and put this one in.
What's this size?
This is 510 thousandths. So this is 10 thou bigger than what we're actually shooting for.
Your final pass is 10,000. So
Which one was it I had?
Yeah.
That one.
Yeah.
Always want to make sure that, of course, if this thing is even slightly off of strength, you're given a chance to bend. If you're doing something like rosewood in 1/4 inch, you might want to just, a bit like with you turners out there, support a thin piece in the middle when you're turning it. You might want to just hold your fingers, and that way you can feel if it's beginning to bend. And if you need to back off, do some kind of come up with an alternative strategy. See the way that's pretty brutal, the way that's curling out. I mean, it's just a 90-degree
it's a good finish on the outside, though.
Yes, it's not bad. You're getting close. What I really like about this is the fact that, you know, you could come into the shop with a few different kinds of wood, run a whole bunch of these off, and then take them home and just use them over the next few months, years, whatever your need is. All I actually have to do is get out far enough to get that baby in there, make sure it's in the center. Hear that creaking? Not a whole lot of actual cutting going on there. Yeah. All right, and then we'll change out the bit to the one that I did sharpen. This is the recommended way to sharpen. You just take it and put it on, you know, a stone or a ceramic. I think I did that on about 8,000. It's not going to need a lot of sharpening. It's a pretty solid piece of steel. But as that edge begins to round off over after a lot of friction. Okay, so again, you want to make sure that this piece comes all the way up. If it doesn't, it's a really good way to bend the dowel. And this is the last one, so you can see there's a difference. That I guess in theory is 5/1000th of an inch thick.
That's pretty exciting, huh? That's coming out well.
Yeah. So it's a patience game, and you can work on your ambidextrous skills by winding it with your left hand or your non-dominant hand if you want. Okay, so at this point, I've got these guys, just made me a dowel. I've just about put my mask on. If I'm going to Rockler to buy a dowel, by now I've just about put my mask on and walked out of the store having driven from home.
You're not going to find the rosewood.
Not going to find rosewood. You're not going to find.
Hey, Dallas, can you confirm that that's a really smooth finish? That's what it looks like from here.
It feels very good. Just a little sanding on that. But like Paul said, for most purposes, you're using the end grain. That's what you're going to see.
Yeah.
But you know, if you had something that was a feature coming up, you could clean that up very nicely.
So here's a set of dies,
Yeah.
and it has a particular useful feature in that, you know how your dowel pins always come with a groove on them so that the fibers can expand a little bit. They've been compressed. So if I can get it out. You can see there's a little groove on there, and it will go in and give you a grooved dowel. So the compressed, it's compression, it's not cutting it out. So these compressed fibers will expand when you put glue into
That's a
them.
choice.
Hmm?
There's a set for that, a die for
Yeah,
that. isn't it?
absolutely.
For
Yeah.
each size.
Yeah, once you cut it to the regular size.
So those are fluted dowels.
Basically, yeah. Yes, it's a
Okay.
fluted dowel. I don't know if you could see close up, but it's nice because it will reduce the friction you need to get it into a nice tight snug hole. And then these fibers will expand with the pouring of the glue. This, I thought, I'm going to really challenge this machine. I want a 1/4-inch Cocobolo dowel. And here it is. Smells like cinnamon. Anyway, go ahead and fire me any questions you would like to. I just wanted to show this off and show you one of those unique pieces that we have in the shop that you're going to have a hard time finding elsewhere. And you may not do it immediately, but like I say, there'll come a day when you want a piece of a dowel made out of a wood that you can't commonly buy, or you have to wait while the internet sends it to you. Any questions?
Paul, there's a question I have about just all these different specialty tools we have. And I'm only going to mention 3 that maybe 2 of them aren't that hidden away. But we have our vacuum bag system. We have our domino. We have our dowel making. I don't know if there's any place we can go to actually see an inventory of that stuff. It might be through, I mean, I wouldn't even have known to ask about a hand cranked dowel making tool, you know? And so it would remain hidden away in a closet somewhere. Do we have on the wall somewhere or on the website someplace a list of all these rather special woodworking tools so that people can at least be aware of them?
We actually, we are in the, well, I don't know if it's available to all members in the tool leads thing, tool leads site. We have an area where we're putting inventory in. I have to admit it's pretty skimpy at the moment, but we do have some inventory. We can certainly think about displaying, and we could take some photographs and
You know, saying what you've just said makes me think if you had a rotating spot on one of the bulletin boards that just featured a different tool that was otherwise hidden away, a picture and a brief description, and you swapped them out occasionally, that would be a piece of conversation. That would be an awareness growing thing. And it wouldn't take too much effort. Something like this is a really kind of cool tool. I'm not even sure where someone would go to get something like that, you know? It makes it kind of special.
You know, we've got several people on the video today. If one of them wants to volunteer to step up, I'll get them in touch with it.
there you go.
We've got some space on bulletin boards where we could do that.
Yeah. I think,
You know,
that is good to publicize our rarely used or rarely seen tools. You know?
I hope, Dallas, you didn't notice that as soon as you asked for a volunteer, I got quiet.
Yeah, it did. We didn't give much time though. Somebody will step up. We need to publicize this.
I think it's a neat little tool. Anyway, so if please ask any other questions. Otherwise, we will move on.
I'm curious if Dan's going to say anything. He turned his video on. He unmuted. He's looking like he's about to say something. What are you going to say, Dan? Oh.
No, I was thinking the friend of mine that could take pictures. I'll pass some of this information by him and see if maybe we can photograph a few of these pieces of equipment next Friday while we're there messing around.
Great. Cool.
Does the club accept antique tools? Is there any place to display them or hold them, or when we get a bigger shop somewhere that we can have a collection of old planes and old drill bits and old saws? Because many of us have got them, but they gather dust and probably go to a swap meet when you drop dead. We sort of talk about a mini museum, in fact.
I think the space would be the issue, right, Dallas?
That's exactly right. But we do in our modeling of what Shop 3.0 would be, we do have some space set aside for that type of display for both current projects and also for some history of woodworking too.
However, let me take Doug's suggestion and Dan's comment and weave them together with what Chris just said. We do have the shop TV. It takes up no additional real estate if it's showing hidden tools or antique tools, and all we really need is pictures and a brief description. I'm one of the people who maintains that, so I am stepping forward when I say this, but if I got pictures of these things and brief descriptions, it would be very easy to put them into rotation on shop TV, and that kind of accomplishes what we were talking about a minute ago.
Yeah, good.
There you go.
Yes, and it puts it out to the general public who are looking at our website. So, if there are no more questions, I will move right along there. You remember I mentioned a mystery tool thing? I came up with a mystery tool that I haven't had. I had one person come up with something that they thought it was to do with moldings, and I have a feeling it is in some way to do with moldings, so I'm not sure. This one, I know exactly what it is, but I will tell you that it may not be a woodworking tool, but it's a little spoke shave. I saw it at the swap meet and I thought, I've never seen one of those. I just have to have it. Then I'll figure out what it's for and, you know, the stupidity of having $5 in your pocket. So it has a movable brass plate here that you can adjust by unscrewing there. And then the blade itself is adjustable with a little screw here. And it is made by a company called Snell & Atherton. The first person that tells me what it is gets it. So it's offset. It's small. I tried sharpening it up. Didn't really work for me with wood, but you know, spoke shaves are a bit of an acquired skill anyway.
So it's meant for an inner radius?
The spoke shave.
Hey, Paul. So
Yes.
I'm going to take a guess here that they use that to make the, in chair making, when you go to weave a seat with hickory bark, they use that to cut the strips off of a hickory log to make the hickory strips to weave in a, for a seat for a chair.
That's very creative. Yeah,
Wow.
that's an interesting possibility. Yeah. Well, maybe I'll try that. I've got some hickory with bark on. But no, it's not what it was designed for, but great guess. Anyone?
It's a scoop spoke shave.
A scoop spoke shave.
The pencil sharpener.
Pencil sharpener, you could probably sharpen your pencils with it. Yeah. Well, we're having some fun guessing anyway.
So what's the answer?
So do I give an answer or do I
you're going to hold us all
do I
to
wait for the prize? Okay. So I finally, what I did was I just started snooping around and I found them on eBay. It's a cobbler's tool. It's for shoemakers. It's called a heel shave. And when you're laying up those layers of leather for a heel of any kind, whether it's spiky, this is what you shave it with. And so it's absolutely useless to me as a woodworker, but if you know anybody who likes to make shoes, I'd be more than happy to give it to them, or anyone else for that matter. If you want to play with it, it's yours. Okay, so thank you for that. That was fun. The very last thing I just wanted to talk about briefly, and we don't have to talk about it today, or ask for input today, but one thing I'd like to introduce to our SIG is talk about our own projects. And I've asked that some of you, if you've got projects going, that you show them off to us. And we've had a few, but I thought maybe we could expand this and make it about projects you'd like to do, maybe projects that are a little daunting for you and you haven't quite figured out how to do them as yet. Maybe between us, we can come up with some assistance for you to do it, and perhaps have a good discussion about your purposes and all that fun stuff. I'm always getting pet projects. So I'm not going to talk about my stuff today, but I just want you guys to think about that, and maybe if you can, at our next meeting, which will be in 2 weeks' time, you guys could bring in, or not bring in, but show us or tell us about projects, and I'll set a little time for that, aside for that, and maybe we can get a little thing going. The other thing I want to very briefly talk about is we are opening the shop up, and I've got to say it's just fantastic to see the machinery going out there and people working on their projects, and it's been a very successful week from what I understand. People have been doing very well with all the necessary precautions that we're taking, and they're still getting their work done. And it's just, I mean, especially for the people that for you guys that spent all those years setting this thing up, to actually see it have to go into hibernation and come back to life. It must have been very, very frustrating for you to see what you worked so hard for have to shut down. But anyway, enough of my stuff. So,
Hey, Paul?
yes.
Those two tables behind you, have you shown those today?
No, I haven't, but if you guys have time, I can, because that was the pet project I was going to do if John got rained out.
I was going to suggest that you show that unique joint you have for the legs going in and the selection of grain on the wood that you worked on.
Yeah.
Well, that's a really interesting thing to do. Let's take enough time with it, so let's do it next time.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds like
It's an interesting joint.
So did you hear that, Dan?
Yes, I did. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and actually they both have different joints on the undersides. So yeah, it would be worth spending a few minutes discussing it if you guys want to. But they're just basically to give you an idea. My wife has been telling me I got to use more curves and less of the straight edges. So and a neighbor asked me to make a piece for her. So the pale colored one is that piece, and the other one is an experimental piece. So
Cool.
anyway, next time.
Hey, Dallas?
Sorry?
Dallas, before you wind down, I just want to make a plug for an upcoming event this evening.
Okay.
This evening, most of you know of Russ Philbeck, one of our renowned woodworkers in San Diego County. And sorry.
Your wife came home.
Wife left home.
Okay, so Russ Philbeck is going to be interviewed by Mike McElney tonight at 7 o'clock on a Zoom session. And we're going to be looking back at what were sort of the origins that motivated Russ to get into woodworking and his path forward, how he stayed motivated and what he was interested in. And so that kind of a thing, we actually have quite a deep pool to tap into. There are a lot of really talented woodworkers in the county. And this is Mike McElney's next attempt at these. The last one we had was with Del Cover, and that was about a specific time in his woodworking where there was his collaboration with Nikki Van St. Phal, a very famous modern art sculpturist, where he would also work with her on collaborating on things like the snake chairs or the inner structures of big statues that they've got throughout the county. It's a recurring theme. It's called Woodworker Spotlight. And the next one is this evening at 7 o'clock. So I just wanted people to know about that so that they could put it on their radar if that was something that would be of interest to them. Okay, thanks.
Yes, she is.
Okay. Paul, anything else?
I don't think so. Think about those projects, or of course projects you've completed. I'd love to see those as well, or we would love to see them. And thank you for checking in today. It's always fun.
One quick question.
Thanks, Paul.
Can you tell me what that tool is?
Which tool?
Well, he's got a
Half
tool.
of a bear trap.
I can't see my own picture, but
Let's have a look.
it's got a sharp edge. It's so you could pulling it through a log or something like that. This is a sharpened edge. There's a handle. It's got sort of rivets holding the blade into place.
That's a draw knife.
Looks like a scorp.
Yeah, scorp is what I call
That's
that.
exactly what it is, a scorp.
How do you spell scorp?
SCORP, the beginning of scorpion. It's yeah, it's basically a bent draw knife with a you know, a two-sided support. It's for hollowing out all sorts of concave things, especially things like seat bottoms and stuff like that.
If anybody would like one, they're very welcome to.
We could put it in a museum.
I will happily buy that from you.
Go ahead and give me a call. I'll give it to you.
That sounds like a good price.
Yeah,
What's your phone number
Alright.
so I can write it down?
it'll be good for making bows, part of a bow.
Yeah.
John, I'll send you a note with the contact information.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great, good.
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Chris.
John. Thank you, Paul.
Okay.
Thank you,
Bye,
everybody.
bye, guys.
Thank you.